The night opened the city like a wound, and as the rustle of rain slid along the eaves, in the mailbox, which Jessie was accustomed to opening mechanically, lay an envelope without a return address, but with a familiar handwriting that sent a chill slowly up her spine, and before she had even had time to take off her shoes, she tore the thin paper, unfolded several pages soaked with the smell of tobacco and heavy words, and read the first line, which made the air in the living room unbreathable. "Daughter, I have been silent and lied for too long, and now I must confess that I am not who you thought I was, and not who I aspired to be, because on the night your mother disappeared, I was not on a business trip, as I said, but I was standing on the threshold of another woman's house, and with my presence began a chain of decisions that broke our home." She froze in the middle of the room, like glass when a stone is thrown at it, and the words from the letter, covered with the shadow of remorse, gurgled inside, and rage flared up in her head, mixed with a disgusting, almost nauseating despair, and then Thomas, turning on the light that cut into her eyes, asked in that quiet voice that always appeared when he saw her vulnerable, but in which now an alarming metal vibrated, "Jessie, what happened? Why are you trembling? What is that in your hands? Why are you looking at me as if I had come too close to the edge beyond which nothing can hold any more?" And she, without taking her eyes off the letter, exhaled, trampling down the desire to hide in herself, and spoke in a long, breathless sentence in which every memory of childhood knelt. "Thomas, he writes that he has lied to me all his life, that those loud quarrels that I remember like a storm over our kitchen, were not accidental, that he had betrayed his mother before she left, and that her disappearance, which he so wanted to declare a mystery or a whim of fate, was actually an escape from humiliation. But there is another detail that cuts me to the core, because he adds that the person he was returning to then was not just someone who had dragged him down, but someone who had information about me, about my origins, about the fact that I might not be his own daughter." Thomas took a step towards her, and this step echoed in the floor with a long explosive creak, but in his eyes, where there was always a restrained balance, suddenly appeared the fear that he tried to hide with a man's imperturbability, and he said as if with a copper wire that is bent by the hands, overcoming the resistance of the material, "Jessie, listen to me, when the world is shaking, you should look not at the wreckage, but at the shore, and I am ready to be for you the shore on which you will land, wet, frozen, irritated, but alive. Just tell me what you need, tell me what I can do, tell me that we will survive this together, because even if his confession is long, like a sleepless night, you are not alone in this darkness. I am here, I am holding on to you, and if necessary, we will go to him in the morning, we will make him look into his eyes and answer the questions that he has put off for years. We will get the truth from where it lies, wrapped in cobwebs, we won't let it rot any longer." And she shook her head, and then she laughed with that silent laugh that comes from helplessness, and tears like splinters grew from her laugh, and she whispered a long, stinging truth that she was ashamed of even in her thoughts. "What if the truth doesn't give me support, but takes away the last thing I have, namely my idea of myself, because if I'm not his daughter, then every photograph, every Christmas card, every memory of his hands teaching me to ride a bike will turn into a staged event, and if my mother left not because we lost her, but because she ran away, then the fact of this flight will become my second heart, beating not with love, but with shame." She began to read the next page aloud, each word cutting the air like a blade, and in the letter, the father, who had always said that honor was something you couldn't buy or get back, admitted that his honor had rotted where he had traded silence for convenience, and that the person who had him on the hook, a woman with a low voice and a pungent perfume, had demanded that he not tell his daughter about the incident at the hospital, where the entry on the card had been changed, where someone's name, which she couldn't see now because of the ink stain, had been crossed out and replaced with hers, and Thomas grabbed onto that detail like a rope and spoke with the determination that always lived in him when he saw injustice gripping someone close to him. "We'll find those records, we'll go to that hospital, we'll dig up the archives, we'll find that woman. We will pull it out of the past as sharply as you are pulling these words out of the dream now, and believe me, I will not let any shadow take you from my hands." And Jessie looked at him as if at that very moment he had already promised more than he had a right to promise, and she said long and bitterly, as if swallowing a thorn, "You have no idea how much it hurts to realize that your house stood on rotten stilts, and I am afraid, Thomas, that if we reveal all this, our house will collapse with you too, because the truth does not care who to destroy, It destroys everything that stands in its way, but I have no right to retreat, because retreating would mean that I agree to live in a rented memory. Outside the window the rain had subsided, but the wind had picked up, and the light in the kitchen had begun to flicker faintly, as if the house itself was hesitating whether to withstand the strain, and at that very moment, when they seemed ready to make a plan for dawn, the doorbell rang with that bell that does not ask permission but demands, and the blow on the armored canvas sounded like a court of judgment, and Jessie, with her white fingers clutching the envelope, took a deep breath as if she were about to dive, but when she opened it, standing on the threshold was the one they had not spoken of for a long time and whose presence she feared like a storm that always found her at her least protected moments, her former lover Leo with a look that had once seemed saving but now seemed like a knife, and without taking a step, he uttered a long, nervous remark that threw away their calm from yesterday. Into the abyss. Jessie, I didn't come here to fight or apologize, I came here because I found what belongs to you, and you must listen to me immediately, because I have a copy of the documents that will tell the truth about your birth and what happened that night, and if you chase me away now, you are chasing away the chance to know who you are, and believe me, I did not come to destroy your home, but I can no longer remain silent, because on my conscience is what your father tried to hide, and I cannot stand it if this silence swallows us both again. Thomas, clenching his jaw, took a half-step forward, and in his voice, with a thin cry, there vibrated resentment, mixed with the otherworldly guilt he felt for the world allowing the past to come without warning, and he said a long, flat, but seething sentence that should have stopped the storm, but only added sparks to the gusts of wind. Leo, if you have come with the truth, you are years too late, and yet, if you hold the key, I will not take it by force, but I will demand that you remember that every word you utter now touches not only her wound, but also our life, which she is trying to build on the ruins, and if you take the risk, you must be prepared to answer not only to her, but to yourself, because the truth you bear may turn out to be not medicine, but poison. And Jessie, squeezed between two men who spoke as if they were two thunderstorm, felt the floor floating under her knees, and said, as if placing her hand on hot iron, "Come in, Leo, and speak, but remember that each of your letters now has the weight of a stone, by throwing which you can change the course of the river, and if you have really found what concerns me, then let this night not end until we know on whose bones my story stands." And at that moment Thomas turned away for just a second to hide from his eyes the flame of jealousy that burned him from the inside, and that second turned out to be enough for not only a person from the past to enter the room, but also a new crack that had cut their house in half, and so the first act ended not with a scream or a fall, but with the silence from which the storm begins, because everyone realized that they had lost something invisible: trust, composure, the feeling that tomorrow would be like today, and it was precisely this invisible the loss proved most painful as the rocking of the boat before the dark water in which they must learn their true name. The wind that blew in through the half-open door scattered the pages of the letter across the floor, as if trying to mix his father's words with the dust so that no one could read them to the end. Leo stepped inside, his rain-stained coat heavy on his shoulders, and his gaze, as he swept the room, swept over Thomas as if he were not a wall but a shadow that could be easily stepped over. Jessie stood between them, her arms folded, as if that were the only way she could keep herself from falling. "Speak." Her voice was long, drawn out, as if it forced the air to overcome the thickness of syrup. "But know this, Leo, if you came to play with me, I will be out of here before you even have time to gather up the scattered cards of your excuses." He did not sit down. He stood holding a thin folder with crumpled edges, and his words, slow as they were, rolled like waves that washed away the shore on which Jessie was trying to gain a foothold. "I found these documents by accident, although, perhaps, there are no accidents. In the archives of an old hospital that was about to close, I came across a file cabinet where your name, Jessie, stood in place of another, erased so that only fragments of the letters remained. Next to it was the signature of the doctor your father never mentioned. And then there was a photograph. Small, faded, but in it the woman I had seen in his company many years ago is holding a baby. This baby has your eyes." Thomas took a step closer, his face tense like a bowstring, ready to release an arrow. "And what are you saying? That her father stole her from someone?" Or maybe she has no right to call him dad. Do you realize that every word you say now is breaking something inside her that is already cracking? Leo didn't look away, he just said long and evenly. I mean, the truth doesn't stop being the truth just because we ignore it. And if this man has built her identity on lies all her life, then maybe she has a right to know who she was before she was forced to become someone else's daughter. Jessie clenched her fingers so that her nails dug into her palms. She thought she was going to hear herself scream, but instead, long, trembling words escaped her mouth. I've lived my life thinking I was betrayed once, the night my mother left. And now you're saying that the betrayal was there from the very beginning, before I took my first step. If that's true, I'll have to hate even my memories, but if you're lying, Leo, I'll hate you for making me doubt every one of them. The silence that followed her words was heavier than any screams. Thomas came over and gently took Jessie by the shoulder, but she didn't look at him, her gaze was fixed on the thin folder in Leo's hands. Show me, she said quietly, but in a way that sounded like a sentence. Leo set the folder on the table, opened it, and yellowed pages fell out, stamped notes, a black and white photograph of a woman with dark hair and a sharp chin holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Thomas bent over the photo, but before he could say anything, Jessie touched the picture, as if afraid it would disappear if she blinked. This is her, she gasped, her voice breaking. This is the woman from my dreams. I always thought she was just a figment of my imagination. Thomas raised his head, his eyes shining with intensity. Jessie, dreams are not proof. They are just a memory game with what we saw or imagined. Leo, on the other hand, leaned closer. What if this is not a game? What if your memory has preserved what others have tried to erase? Her gaze darted from one to the other, and in each she saw something different. In Thomas, the fear of losing her; in Leo, the obsession with proving himself right. And in that moment, she realized that a battle was unfolding between the two of them, in which she was both the field, the trophy, and the judge at the same time. Jessie took the documents in her hands, and the cold of the paper went through her like a touch of ice. If that's true, she said slowly, then my life began with a disappearance. And the question now is whether I want to find what's gone, or whether it's better to leave it buried so as not to destroy what's still there. Outside the window, the wind had changed to the monotonous patter of rain. And in the room, the three people were silent, each of them understanding that if Jessie decided to open the door to the past completely, none of them would come out of this story the same way they came in. And that silence was the loudest sound of the night. The rain beat against the windows so monotonously that it seemed to be measuring time, counting down the minutes until the moment when they would have to make a choice. The folder with documents lay on the table, and each sheet in it gave off a coldness, as if it had absorbed decades of silence. Jessie sat with her knees clenched, and Thomas stood behind her, clasping his hands to restrain his impatience. Leo slowly opened the sheets one by one, as if afraid that by showing everything at once he would break her completely. This is a record from the maternity ward, he said, touching the yellowed lines with his finger. It says your date of birth, but your mother's name is different. Not the one you know. And here, he slid her another sheet, an official certificate of change of data. Not her signature, not your mother's. And definitely not your father's, although the handwriting is familiar. Jessie stared at the signature as if it could speak. Her memory, like an old movie, began to play back fragments, a strange woman's laughter in the kitchen, the smell of perfume she had smelled as a child but couldn't explain. And who is this woman? She asked slowly, but her voice was already metallic. Leo swallowed before answering. Her name was Marlene. She worked for the same company as your father. And she disappeared 6 months after you were born. There are rumors that she went abroad, but I found a record in the private medical archives. She was examined a week after you were discharged from the hospital. It says that her child was transferred to the care of another family. Thomas interrupted abruptly, his voice taut as a wire. And you mean that this other family is Jessie's father and her mother? Why, Leo? Why all this? Because, he trailed off, as if confessing something personal, I knew Marlene. And she left me a packet of documents with a request to give them to you, someday. I didn't do it then because I was afraid it would break you. Jessie stood up, her gaze turning cold. I don't need your excuses. Better tell me what's next. He took out the last sheet and unfolded it slowly. It was a photocopy of Marlene's passport, and another photo of her standing next to a young woman. They were both laughing, holding the same blanket that had wrapped the baby in the first photo. Only now did Jessie see, the second woman was her mother. They knew each other, Jessie whispered. They were together that day. Thomas gently touched her shoulder, but she shook his hand off. Now I must find her, she said firmly. If Marlene is alive, she will tell me why I was given away. And if not, I will find the one who knew the truth. The wind outside the window had suddenly picked up, and it seemed as if the night was pushing them down a path they could never return from. Thomas looked at Leo with suspicion that was now burning like an open fire. And you will come with us if necessary. You have already intervened, now answer to the end. Leo only nodded, but there was something in his eyes that Jessie saw. He feared this journey more than he wanted to admit. And it was in that moment that she realized that searching for Marlene would reveal not only the truth about her, but also something they would all rather leave in the shadows. The rain had stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind puddles on the streets, the dim lights of streetlights flickering. Jessie stood by the window, looking out into the blurry night as if searching for direction. Thomas was sitting on the couch, his body tense, ready to rise at any moment. Leo, meanwhile, was silently poring over the papers, as if he were trying to find something else to hide. We're leaving today, Jessie finally said, her voice firm, as if it were not a decision but a sentence. Until someone decides again that I'm not ready to hear the truth. Thomas stood up. It's pointless. Going out in the middle of the night to look for someone we don't even know is alive? Alive or not, she interrupted, it doesn't matter anymore. Standing still makes it harder for me to breathe than during a storm. Leo slowly folded his arms over his chest. I know where to start. There's a man who used to keep Marlene's things. He used to be a janitor at the hospital where you were born. He lives on the outskirts now. But I warn you, he's not the kind of guy who welcomes visitors. The road out of town was dark, with only the headlights piercing the blackness. Jessie sat in the front seat, clutching the photograph Leo had given her, and Thomas drove, his eyes fixed on the road, though he caught Leo's gaze in the mirror every now and then, filled with some hidden tension. When they pulled up outside an old house with peeling walls, the air was thick, like before a thunderstorm. They got out, and the wooden steps creaked under their feet as if to warn, don't come in. The door opened before they knocked. A man with snow-white eyebrows and trembling hands stood in the doorway, but there was something watchful and firm in his gaze. You didn't come by chance, he said in a low, hollow voice. And I know who you want to ask about. Jessie took a step forward. Did you know Marlene? He laughed softly, without joy. I did. And I knew the one you call mother. I was there the day you were discharged. And I saw them standing in the hallway arguing. Thomas leaned forward. What were they arguing about? The man looked at him, and a shadow appeared in his eyes. About you, little girl. About who you should belong to. And believe me, they weren't the ones making the decisions then. Jessie felt her heart rise to her throat. Then who? Who decided my fate? He sighed, his shoulders hunched. The one who is still alive. The one who has been watching you all these years. And if you go any further, you will come face to face with him. For a moment, there was a silence in the air that could have been cut with a knife. Then the man opened the door wider. I have something she left for you. But before I give it to you, think about whether you are ready to know everything that is written on it. And in that moment, Jessie realized, there was no turning back. The old guard slowly disappeared into the darkness of the corridor, leaving them on the threshold, where the dim light of the lamp swayed with every gust of wind. A moment later he returned, holding a small wooden box with a metal lock on which the letters, J. M., were deeply scratched. He placed it on the table as if he were giving away something that weighed more than the years of his life. She said that this would only come to you if you yourself came for the truth. His voice was quiet, but there was a mixture of respect and sadness in it. But remember, sometimes the truth doesn't set you free, it kills you slowly. Jessie touched the lid. The wood was cold as stone. Thomas leaned closer to examine the lock, but Leo put a sharp hand on his shoulder. "Don't touch it," he said, and fear rang in his voice. "She has to do it herself." Jessie took a deep breath and turned the key in the lock. The box clicked, the lid slowly gave way, and inside lay several letters, a small silver key-shaped pendant, and a thin notebook with a cracked cover. She unfolded the first letter, and the words, written in a quick, nervous hand, struck like a blade. "Jessie, if you are reading this, then you have chosen to follow the path I have been running from all my life. You were my daughter from the moment I first laid eyes on you, but the world decided otherwise. You were taken, not from my heart, but from my arms. By a man you know, and fear. He is still there. He watches over you, and he needs you. Not because of love, but because your name, the key to what he has lost." Thomas clenched his fists. "Who is this man?" Jessie didn't answer, leafing through the pages of the notebook. There were dates, meeting places, brief descriptions of people. And everywhere there was one phrase, written on almost every page: "He knows where we are." The old guard looked up. "You don't understand, he never disappears. And if you came for the truth, he already knows you're here." There was a sudden knock on the door, hard, dull, like the blows of a hammer. Leo and Thomas turned at the same time, and Jessie felt the blood pounding in her temples. "It's him," the old man said, and there was no doubt in his voice. "And if you open this door, you'll never go back." Jessie stood, holding a key pendant in one hand and a letter from Marlene in the other. Thomas looked at her, waiting for the signal. Leo clenched his jaw, ready for something even he couldn't name. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. And in that moment she realized that what was at stake was not only who she was, but who she would become. She took a step toward the door, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Whether she would open it depended only on whether she was willing to sacrifice everything for an answer she might hate for the rest of her life.